For those who have been around since the beginning of this channel, you might recall that I covered Gundam Crossfire almost 2 years ago. In fact, most of my videos back then were under 5 minutes because I had only played the games for a few hours and spent a few minutes talking about them without any script at all. And while I can occasionally operate off the cuff, I can't say that I was or am coherent enough to create a video strictly by expressing my thoughts on the fly. But I apparently didn't know that at the time and just kept doing it. Even today, after hours of writing, I find myself tripping up on some details or not focusing enough on things I probably should have, so you can imagine the quality was probably abysmal. So because of their questionable nature, I've put many of those old videos on private. This is simply because I'd love to revisit those games and make bigger and better videos about them all for you. So if you're a regular, this is my updated review of Gundam Crossfire. I'll be diving deeper into the gameplay mechanics, storyline, and overall experience to give you a clearer picture of what this game has to offer, or doesn't. Of course, if you're new or haven't seen that video, it doesn't really matter. So let's get started and see how this game holds up. Gundam Crossfire is, quite simply, Namco Bandai's attempt at making a more mature Gundam game. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't Gundam already mature? Don't a lot of people die constantly in this obviously morally ambiguous mecha franchise? Well, yeah, you're right. Gundam is a mature series, and its creators will do everything in their power to crush whatever heroic fantasy viewers have created around a main character. It involves highly complicated politics and implications that are simply too vast to explain in a video about Gundam Crossfire. Surprisingly, despite having such a vast and complicated set of stories and themes, Gundam Crossfire doesn't actually include any of that. It barely has a story to speak of. Instead, much like Gun Griffin, it simply illustrates a conflict within the universe at hand. Specifically, it takes place during Universal Century 0079, the One-Year War, and aside from some summaries and briefings, you're not going to get much more than that. Why there wasn't at least some attempt to create even a self-contained narrative, I have no idea. The fact that you can play in 2 separate campaigns as either Zeon or Federation forces seems like a great opportunity for 2 interesting takes on either side. Anyhow though, my point is that portraying the conflict through 2 separate personal stories, much like many war films do, would have been far more effective. But instead what we got was a whole lot of nothing at all. Before I dive into the gameplay, it's probably worth mentioning that Crossfire was a PS3 launch title. And if you know anything about the chaos of the PS3's early years, you'd know that for an embarrassingly long time, the best game for the system was Resistance. Crossfire's only competition at the time was another game, Genji Days of the Blade, rather legendarily known for a giant crab meme rather than anything else.
The stages of the game will also be based on famous battles which actually took place in ancient Japan. So here's this giant enemy crab.
That game was something closer to Onimusha or Devil May Cry though, rather than a third-person shooter. So in a lot of ways, Crossfire was pretty much the only game of its class on the system for a good while. Though it is worth noting that launch titles are usually at a huge disadvantage due to developers having to work with relatively new development kits and not yet understanding all the quirks of the software and hardware at hand. And when it came to the PS3 Cell microprocessor, not a lot of developers understood it later in the console's lifecycle, let alone at launch. Anyway, if you're familiar with something like XCOM, then you're aware of something far superior when it comes to mission structure. Gundam Crossfire operates on a clock, where missions pop up along a certain timeline. It's up to you to make the proper upgrades as time goes on. If you don't, you're going to be completely destroyed, regardless of the difficulty you've selected. Yes, Crossfire is one of those overly difficult games that probably, if it had been in the oven just a little bit longer, might have had some strategic thinking behind it. Though in actuality, all you really need to do is pick the right upgrade for whichever unit you're focusing on, and for those units you want the absolutely pitiful AI to bring into battle. That is, if a mission happens to allow teammates. Newbies are going to be totally lost and run into a lot of impossible missions if they don't follow a guide or clue into the game's secret, grinding. There are always days between every mission, and you need those days for repairs, upgrades, and waiting for whatever unit or pilot you might have ordered. What the game doesn't tell you is that instead of simply progressing the day, you can repair and upgrade units while playing training missions. This nets you points, a lot of them, and gives you a huge edge as things move forward. However, it is a lot of grinding in a game that is less than great at handling its machinery, but I'll be getting to that in a moment. It's also worth noting that this doesn't apply to the Xeon campaign at all. Instead, you're often given far more points for missions, which likely means that the developers designed the Federation campaign in a way that requires you to grind as much as possible. And you just know how fun it is to grind in a third-person action game with barely any RPG elements at all. Anyhow, I'd like to tackle the upgrade system, which is so bare bones, it's embarrassing. You simply select one of 3 traits to upgrade: attack, weapons, or defense, and hope that they might actually be worth something. There are so many upgrade paths that simply net you nothing at all. Oftentimes, getting a particular unit to level 8 and everything means absolutely nothing. You won't really know if that's the case though, you just have to go with it. There is also the option of having a unit be more maneuverable in different environments, but this is a complete waste as it only affects boosting and the paint job. And well, boosting sucks so hard in this game that you might as well just spend those points on another upgrade. You and your pilots can level up as well, earning combat experience through completing missions. However, it doesn't seem to do a whole lot either. Both of these systems feel almost incomplete, as if the game was rushed to meet the PS3's launch date. If they had been fleshed out, well, Gundam Crossfire would have been a whole lot better. For some unknown reason, despite the hundreds of hours of source material available at the time, the developers just didn't get the movement right. Literally everything in this game feels as if it's a tin can robot moving. Not exactly slow, but at such an off-kilter pace that nothing really feels right. Ironically, I would consider it robotic. It's as if animation keyframes were missing somewhere, and someone behind the scenes tried their best to design the movement system so that it matched. You're always moving slow enough just to annoy you, but at the same time in a very floaty manner. As I said, the boost sucks, but it can bypass a little bit of distance, but it never lasts long enough. And as you probably guessed, no matter what upgrade you have equipped it never gets better or worse. What's baffling is that the development studio behind Crossfire is BEC. They just happen to be responsible for a god-awful number of Gundam and Super Robot series games, so much that I don't have enough breath in my lungs to list them all. So is it too forward of me again to suspect that this game might just be an early build simply rushed out to meet a deadline? No, this whole thing stinks of rushing for the PS3 launch date. I honestly wonder if they regret that one. Probably, as this thing was absolutely lambasted on release. Weapons are just as floaty as the movement somehow. Sometimes you'll be facing a completely different direction and whatever you fired will just fly off sideways because the game has already decided that that's where that particular projectile is going. You can unlock a handful of weapons, but the majority of them are just machine guns, missile launchers, and beam variants. Actually, I'm pretty sure that's all of them. If you figure out how to lock on, which is poorly explained in this game, victory usually depends on circle strafing and outfiring everything around you, assuming that you don't run out of ammunition immediately. There never does seem to be enough ammo, so you'll likely fall on whatever unit has a machine gun due to this category of weapon almost always having a higher ammo count. That, and it seems to be the only weapon set that works the way it should. If you run out of ammo, most missions do have Gun Griffin style resupply points that exist as long as enemies don't destroy them, but this really just adds another level of annoyance to the game as they don't move around like the helicopters do in that series. That, and if you're not right in an enemy's face, they have a habit of rushing these little bases. You do have the option to use melee weapons, but they are as slow and cumbersome as traversing the environment. One thing Gundam has always excelled at is its use of melee in the series, and this game just gets it wrong in every way. It's so baffling that I'll just post the footage here for you to see because I can't even describe the level of jank that's on display here. And while you might find a way to get a handle on Crossfire's combat, all of that can be easily disrupted if an enemy happens to destroy the wrong arm. Interestingly, the game has a damage system akin to games like MechWarrior. If a piece of the unit takes too much damage, it will be destroyed and just break off. Now, while this system can lead to some incredibly frustrating scenarios where a player is forced to go against insurmountable odds with no limbs, I do have to give BEC some credit for staying accurate to Gundam lore and acknowledging that most mobile suits house pilots in the chest. So yes, you can still play this game even without a head, but again, this game is Gundam Crossfire. As for AI, I don't think I need to say much. It bull rushes whatever is in front of it and fires head on blindly. Again, combat is just about outfiring whatever is in front of you. Even the odd boss, if you could call them that, barely does anything at all. And wouldn't you know it, your teammates aren't much better. For the most part, they can't be commanded and wander around mindlessly, barely ever following you. When you finally do unlock a few commands, they just don't seem to work. No matter how much I personally press the apparent commands, they just wouldn't do what I was asking. The rare times that it seemed like they did, kind of felt like a fluke. Okay, so the big elephant in the room though is obviously how long does it take to actually play as a Gundam in Gundam Crossfire? Well, for me, it wasn't until literally 2 hours and 58 minutes. Yeah, it takes a really long time to play as a Gundam in this Gundam game, but I'm not really going to complain as it's probably more lore accurate. What I will complain about is the fact that once you unlock what should be a superior unit, the Gundam and all its variants within Crossfire, they operate exactly the same as any other bipedal unit. Admittedly, they are a bit tougher stat-wise, but that's about it. You're essentially operating nothing more than a reskinned GM. Graphically, the whole game feels like a dulled out Gundam episode. If you can imagine that the picture has been soaked in a mud puddle, that's pretty much what you're getting here. Though that's absolutely what you got with a console game released in 2006, when series like Gears of War were beginning to hit their stride. Crossfire was absolutely birthed right at the peak of gunmetal and sepia color palette popularity, but it was never going to be a proper part of a franchise known for its distinctively colorful designs since 1979. It's genuinely boring to look at, lacking any interesting locations, as they are all bog standard biomes. And no, they aren't worth listing because you already know what to expect, don't you? I guess if I was to think of a standout feature in these areas, it would be all the pop-in. There's a lot of that, and it's very noticeable in cutscenes. Yes, even with the game installed on the PS3 hard drive. Now, I don't usually mention something as mundane as a menu system, but Crossfire has to have one of the slowest ever. Because of the delay between selecting something and getting what you want, it makes those times when you have to upgrade and grind between missions incredibly slow. You can spend about 3 minutes in a training mission and then 5 just trying to save and select upgrades for even a handful of units. But hey, the music is pretty good, though I wouldn't be too surprised if it was lifted straight from the series, which, if you know anything about how Gundam tracks are handled on YouTube, means that I won't be able to show you anything without some sort of issue. So I'm really sorry about that. Japan simply handles its copyright system way differently than we do here in North America, and my channel is way too small for YouTube to even care to do anything about it. Despite all of the complaints, I'm actually glad that I could play through Crossfire. I'd always wondered what I missed out on with this one. Now I know that it wasn't anything at all. I suppose that's simply because it is clearly incomplete. The bones of so many interesting ideas are here, and I would have liked to see them all fleshed out. Sadly, that would never happen, and it would be a very long time until North America got a half-decent Gundam game on the PS3. And all of these would literally be the Dynasty Warriors Gundam spin-offs. Ouch. Anyhow, have you played this one? What did you think? And what was the best Gundam game you've ever played? I'm Kei-Nova, and I'll see you in the next one.